Hello, and welcome to the Capital Gains Show. On this episode, I'm doing a debate with my friend Aleph, and we met on the internet, and he was gracious enough to agree to come on to the show and have a casual, friendly debate and talk about our worldviews and whether we think socialism or capitalism is going to be the best way to organize society. Aleph, if you want to tell us a little bit about your position, kind of like a high level view, and maybe a bit of how you came to this position, and then we can go from there.
Sure, I appreciate the opportunity to be on here with you.
Yeah.
I'm actually a former ANCAP myself. For I guess I would consider at one point I would have considered myself a radical individualist. Like many ANCAPs, I was, just of the mindset that it's that extreme liberalism. You want to do drugs, you want to mess yourself up, you want to kind of do whatever you want. It doesn't have any bearing on me, and I was for it. I didn't understand the concept of anything beyond the individual. And I think for myself at least, and for many in my position, I know that once you're able to see the forest through the trees, you understand that there is no man is an island, and there are consequences, whether they be the immediate ones you can see right in front of your face, or ones that take years or decades to manifest. So I came to abandon the position of radical individualism in favor of a more pragmatic approach toward long-term prosperity. I believe that no system that's based primarily on economics is a fundamentally sustainable system for ordering society. Um, there must be something more than production to measure the wealth and the prosperity of society, and to ensure its long-term success.
So I think you're referring to qualitative versus quantitative there, right? It's not all just about production or GDP or per capita earnings. You think that there's something else there that's necessary to make a prosperous and happy society. Is that right?
Yes, that's a big part of it.
Okay, and then so eventually you came to identify with socialism, right? And but if I'm not
I came. Let me just interject quickly. I came to identify with National Socialism. I believe
yeah.
Marxism is inherently international, and I don't believe that it's sustainable long term.
So, in terms of a national socialism thing, you feel like there should be strong, maybe not border walls, but strong borders and
Of course,
delineations between different cultures and communities or societies, as it were.
of course.
So, um, let me ask you this then: when it comes to the National Socialism, do you feel like that you have more of an emphasis on the nationalistic part, on the social unity part, or do you feel more like your emphasis is more on the economic part in the way of how the means of production are owned and organized and that kind of thing?
I believe that they feed off of each other. Um, don't think if in my the way I look at things, when you're a National Socialist, they they are they are essentially one and the same. I adopted that label. To me, is more fitting because when the term socialist is used, it's used in a Marxian sense and it's international. But I believe
Yeah.
that if you have as your underlying philosophy or your underlying goal of society to benefit your nation, um, there are going to be inherent aspects of socialism that would come into play. I don't think that in a society that truly valued the nation, we would allow many of the things that we have under a capitalist system. For just a quick example, like the medical debt we have in the U.S., and I know that's not necessarily a consequence of strictly the free market, but either way, we do have people taking on severe debt for medical procedures, Um, I don't think that's acceptable, and I think that when you do look at yourself as part of the nation, you you have a sense of a moral obligation to your brother and to your sister.
Hmm. I see. And when you talk about the nation, do you feel like your ideal nation would be one that has big restrictions on immigration, or would it be more welcome to assimilating foreigners and that kind of thing? Or do you feel like this is more along a do you want to delineate racially or culturally or something like that, or are you more is your border going to be a little bit more porous and
Cul-
open, as it were?
Cultural delineation is an absolute necessity. You cannot have what we have now in the U.S., which is basically many factions fighting over power to benefit their people, um, whether that be religion, whether that be racial, whether that be just cultural ways of life that are developed over thousands of years. I don't believe that is sustainable to essentially fractionate yourself and ensure that you're going to be in a situation where it's just basically a turf war. The racial element to it, that's more debatable because there are quite a few examples of assimilation from different countries and different races of people. I think it's generally I think the idea of um, total 100%, like the one drop rule, I don't know that that's absolutely necessary. um and there, obviously there are plenty of white people who don't agree with me, and they're that's it's not like everyone's a monolith. But I
Yeah.
wouldn't say that what we have now, where basically you can apply for some kind of citizenship or some kind of visa, and then bring in you know 10, 12 people as an extension of yourself, is any kind of sustainable way to manage immigration.
Hmm. I see. And then if I get your I think I understand your perspective where you're saying that if you want to maintain a certain type of cultural standard, or I don't know if you want to use like the word cultural purity or something, but a certain type of cultural norm or expectation, and a certain degree of unity or a certain degree of similarity among the people, that there would be some degree of economic planning required, not in an internationalist sense, right? But there would be some sort of planned economic thing where there's going to be restrictions on what people are allowed to do in terms of how they associate. Because if you have pure freedom of association, then you're going to quickly slippery slope into open borders and cultural plurality and all those other things, right?
Yes. So this is a two-pronged answer.
Mm-hmm.
Firstly, there definitely would be some aspects of economic planning. I don't believe that, just off the top, it's just a simple example of shipping jobs overseas, importing cheaper products from other countries. Um, I don't think the I don't think what we have we definitely in the US and the Western world in general, if you're looking at the pricing mechanism, we definitely benefit from international trade. But
Sure.
to me, when you're looking at that, we do benefit from a price structure, but outside of that, I believe we've lost much more than the money that we've saved. Um, Secondly, I believe that if the economic restrictions, like the actual force necessary to be used by the state, will be greatly reduced if generations of people are brought up to value the nation. I believe that you do not need the absolute. I don't believe you need totalitarianism in the way that people are probably imagining my position, when you've spent decades raising your children to value the nation and to value the long term sustainability and success of your nation. I think people will self-manage to some extent, and the state can step in for the rest.
Hmm. I see. Well, um,
And we had, sorry to interrupt, but we had that here in the U.S. for quite a while. We looked at the import of products from other countries as an insult to American industry and to American workers, and detrimental to American jobs. Um, because we valued more the nation of the U.S. as we've gotten more and more consumerist and more reliant on the international trade. That's gone by the wayside, and the only thing that matters is the dollar.
Mm-hmm. Um, I do. I do recall reading about the more nationalistic economic policies of the U.S. in the past, and it's obviously gotten more open to international trade, and we have more foreign-made goods on our shelves than we used to. That's obviously true. But I feel like that's a benefit for society as a whole. It's a kind of arbitrage to find who can make the most quantity and quality of a product at the lowest price, and whether or not that's in your own country or in a foreign country is really irrelevant in the big scheme of things, because the most important goal in an economic sense anyway is to have the largest quantity of goods available to consumers at the lowest possible price, and that's how you maximize prosperity for everyone, including prosperity for the poor. But if you want to have some kind of national pride, or a kind of flag waving pride by saying that everything you consume and everything you produce is done domestically, then then obviously your concern there is more than just economical. It's also kind of like like rooting for your favorite team in a sports game or something, and then you end up sacrificing some amount of prosperity, in the sense that you're going to pay more for products, and the products are going to be less available, but at least they all say made in the USA on them, if that's important to you. I think that most people on Earth today, though, are siding along with the more globalization argument, where foreign made goods are perfectly okay if it's something that's going to be beneficial for your pocketbook. And I think that people are voting with their dollars, and most of those dollar votes are just going to whatever product it is that's going to best meet their needs at the lowest possible price. And sometimes it's still something that's going to be made in America. I still buy a lot of American-made products, but I do buy a very large quantity of foreign-made products as well. But what I see is a nationalist or a pride sentiment getting in the way of overall economic growth for everyone, and slowing progress, even if only incrementally. But I would say the more you try to artificially limit trade, the greater degree of economic damage you're going to do to yourself. But at least at least the flag you're flying is I guess is, if that's important to you, then that's the way to do it. I just don't think that. I think that less and less people are feeling the importance of the nationalist argument over time. I don't know if you feel like there's a resurgence in the nationalist position, but I feel like it's kind of become less popular lately. What do you think?
Well, you said a lot there. I'd like to address a couple of things. I don't.
Sorry, I went on a bit.
No worries. It's not. To me, it's wholly inaccurate to. If I haven't made myself clear, then please let me know. But it's wholly inaccurate to describe my my desire for this system based purely on flag waving
Mm-hmm.
and attributing it to a sports team. It's much more than that. A sports team makes no difference in the long term of anything. It's trivial, and it means virtually nothing except short-term entertainment.
Sure, but
When
what
you're
I
talking
was trying to use
when
it
you're
as an
talking about
analogy,
when,
I guess,
well,
is so.
I don't believe your analogy is accurate, because
Okay.
you've boiled it down to flag waving and a sticker on a product saying made in the USA, and that's most certainly not my position.
Okay.
Um, it's not just ideological in that I want to benefit the nation for national pride. Pragmatically, it is much more beneficial long term to have these policies. You say that we will stifle some degree of progress by removing some aspects of international trade, or placing more barriers to international trade. But I'd like you to define progress, because to me, if you're defining progress as nothing more than the pricing structure, then you're failing to account for anything else that makes a society or a nation successful.
Hmm. Um, I think I see what you mean. What I what I would say is that progress, when it comes to uh, people being happy and feeling fulfilled with their lives and so on, it's mostly about them being able to exercise their free will and having the most possible choices available to them, so they feel like they have the most control over their lives.
I don't agree with that at all. That has
Yeah.
not been the case nearly. That is such a new phenomenon in human history. People were much happier when they had less. Just because we don't have a million items on the shelf to buy at any given moment does not mean that people can't be happy. That hasn't been what human history has been. Um, I don't believe that. I don't believe that just having the ability to do what you want and to buy what you want and to do all these things results in happiness. If it did, we would have much more happy societies today, and we don't. We have record numbers of people on all kinds of drugs, on all kinds of prescription drugs, illicit drugs, because they want to escape from this consumerist hellscape.
Consumerist hellscape. Yeah, I hear that argument a lot. I would say that it's not only about, but to back up just a tiny bit, it's not only about just having more, choices in terms of more varieties of products on the shelf, but it's also about making those kind of things more accessible, and not only, not only for like food and medicine, but also for luxury goods. And people do get a lot of happiness when they have more access to those goods. For example, they have like a there's a misery index that gets compiled and released every once in a while, and the countries that are the most miserable are the ones that tend to have the least amount of products available. When people don't have access to any form of entertainment or any form of staples like food or diapers or aspirin, or those things are a lot more expensive, the people tend to be less happy. When it comes to prosperity and people having, a lot of joy in their life, usually it's when you get to a situation where you spend less money on, you spend less money and time trying to acquire the basics, and you get to spend more money on time on conspicuous consumption and entertainment and leisure and things like that. If there's is there some other metric or some other dimension where you think that people become happier that I'm not seeing here? You said that it's not only, economic choice that makes people happy. I'm willing to hear what else it would be, but I'm not sure. You mean like social cohesion or something like that?
So sure, okay. So social cohesion, sure. When if you have a high trust society, which is one of the core functions of a nationalist ideology, people are generally happier. Of course, that's a lot of speculation because there's really no data on that. But I tend to think if you would look at things in a micro perspective, when you have like a high trust neighborhood, people are more friendly. People do things together. You're not afraid to leave your door
Sure.
unlocked. That's how I grew up.
Yeah.
So um, I think that's one aspect. Another aspect that the West certainly suffers from is low birth rates, and this is almost exclusively a phenomenon among white people. Um, we've
Isn't
if
Asia
you
suffering from a lot of that as well? Like
Yeah, well, I
Japan
mean,
and Korea?
yeah, Japan's really bad, but I mean, in the West, and the West
Oh,
is not
okay.
a white monolith.
Yeah.
But so you can't just boil it down to being in the West. Um, but yeah, certainly, a couple of the Asian countries are really bad as well. But I don't believe that just because you can go to the store and have access to goods, you might get short-term happiness from it. Like, you can go buy a nice car, you might get some short-term happiness from it. You might enjoy it, but it is a
Yeah.
materialist worldview. People would be much happier in the long run if they had families and children, especially when they get older and realize that you only have a small window to do that and to build those relationships that are supposed to last you for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
I don't, and you mentioned the misery index. Those indexes are judged based on West. They typically look at third world countries and they judge happiness based on first world standards. So I don't think that's really a fair comparison. If you were to have lines drawn and not apply one set of standards onto a different people, then you might get different results. There have been studies in the U.S. that show poorer people are happier than rich people. So I don't think that you
Sometimes.
can attribute.
Yeah.
I don't think you can attribute happiness to anything in the material world. It's only short term and it's fleeting. And it seems that libertarianism and capitalism in general, I do refer to capitalism as economic liberalism, because when you boil it down, it basically is everything is a commodity. Everything can be bought and sold for pretty much at a whim, so long as you're not
Yeah.
cheating someone.
Yeah.
I don't think that people in the long run. I think it's obvious now. Like I mentioned earlier, we have record numbers of people on antidepressants, especially women over 40. I don't think that's because they couldn't go to the store and buy makeup or buy a car in their 20s. It's because as they age, they didn't have families, and they don't have fulfilling relationships long term.
Yeah.
Same thing goes for men. The number of antidepressants for men is just a bit lower than women.
Uh, I might try to argue that increased consumption of antidepressants would be an indicator of a happier society, because people are less depressed than the ones that aren't consuming so many antidepressants. But I'm not really going to make that argument, because that one would be a hard one to defend or disprove either way.
Well, I don't. Not. It's not even that. I think that's a ridiculous argument. I mean,
Well,
antidepressants are treating a symptom. They're chemically blocking your your ability to feel depressed.
yeah.
That's treating a symptom. That's not treating the cause.
One of the funny things though, when it comes to being having more wealth and having more luxuries and so on, is that gluttony increases. People get fatter, people consume more booze and more drugs, recreational drugs, as well as medicinal or like prescribed drugs. But I wouldn't say that a greater consumption of those things is an indicator necessarily of a lack of happiness among people. I feel like those are the kind of things those are things when you can party harder, so to speak. And I can tell you, like, I've done a lot of partying with friends, and I've consumed a lot of drugs and alcohol. And when I didn't have the means to get those things, when I was too poor to party like that, it made me sad. And then when I had more money and I was able to spend more money on those kind of luxuries and be more gluttonous in that regard, it made me happier. And a lot of, I mean,
And you think that's a recipe for long-term happiness, either in yourself or in society as a whole?
yeah, it certainly can be, and different people have different values. Some people don't enjoy messing themselves up and getting
Okay.
drunk, but some
So let
people
me ask
do.
you this. So let me ask you this.
Mm.
Suppose your idea is pressed, not forced in a coercion sense, but just most people adopt your view, and they believe that the pursuit of drugs and alcohol, it makes them happy in the short term, so therefore that's what matters to them, and if they don't get it, they feel sad. So people work towards that, and then
Mm.
we have, over time, we have a significant portion of the society, I don't know, 10, 20, 30% of the society, who is high or drunk at any given time. Is that good or bad for society? Whether economically, whether socially, whatever metric you want to use, is there any metric that says that's good?
Well, yeah, it depends on the metric that you want to use. It depends on your standard. I of course would argue that it would be a good thing as long as it's people fulfilling their desires. The
I'm not sure how you could make that argument if you're coming from an economic sense, because people who are high, people who are drunk tend to be less productive.
That's true, but you can, despite that, the countries that have the most gluttony and the highest alcohol consumption per capita also tend to be the most productive countries, more or less. It's not in lockstep, but that trend is there, because you can work hard and you can play hard. You can have work time and you can have recreation time, and you can work towards a goal and then fulfill it. And when people are too poor or forbidden from those kind of things, then they tend to make black markets to try and acquire them. Like prohibition of alcohol in this country was a big mistake, and Congress, only let it happen for about a decade before they came to their senses and made alcohol legal again. And I would say that when when certain places decriminalize things like marijuana and mushrooms, what they do is they're reducing the overall harm and misery in society. People aren't going to be thrown in jail for doing those drugs anymore, and arresting someone and throwing them in jail for doing an illegal drug is going to make them a lot less productive than they would be if they were free and able to work 8 hours a
Well,
day, and then
I think that's debatable. I think that's debatable.
mhm.
I don't think that I don't think the punishment for doing mushrooms or smoking weed has to be jail time.
Oh, well, that's good.
You can
Okay.
you could be. I'm certainly saying they should.
Do you
I
not
don't.
think they should
They,
be
they have.
legal? Do you think they should just be
They should a
discouraged
hundred, a
but
hundred
remain
percent, a hundred
available?
percent, 100%. They should be illegal. There should be a drug war. There should be prohibition on alcohol. Um,
Wow.
but
Yeah.
the difference is it shouldn't just be a top-down punitive system. You take a look at schools today. It should, like, there's I'm not going to be too involved, too
Mm-hmm.
in depth in this specific subject, but
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of social programming in schools today, from
Sure.
from 5 years old and up, when people get into public school. If you were to spend that time teaching children to value the nation, and to value their productivity for the nation, and to valuing their brother and their sister,
Mm-hmm.
you wouldn't have nearly the number of federal agents having to enforce these laws as you would otherwise. You say that the war on drugs is bad. To me, it's bad because it failed. I don't know that it was an earnest attempt, but any war on any behavior that you're trying to discourage cannot just be a punitive war. It has to be a social war, and it has to be taught from children, from a childhood age. You can't just expect to make long-term change in 10 years. You've got to have an entire generation of people to to teach values, and to teach them not only the dangers, but I see. This is easy for me to say because I've never had alcohol. I'm 30 years old, and I've never had one sip of alcohol.
Hmm. Okay.
So it's a lot easier for me to say I understand that, and I'm not under no illusion that removing alcohol from society is going to be an overnight thing and people aren't going to suffer short term. But sure, I accept that. But again, to me, I'm looking at the long term, and it seems that, yeah, alcohol and drugs do offer some kind of benefit short term, in terms of your perceived happiness. I don't argue that, but
Mm-hmm.
it's detrimental. I mean, like you mentioned earlier, um, about gluttony. These societies, these more
Yeah.
wealthy societies, tend to be more gluttonous.
A lot of
People get
people want to
fat.
be gluttonous, and it makes them
Yeah,
happy.
yeah, I understand that, but that's not okay. You can't argue that gluttony is good for anyone individually, or good for society as a whole over the long term.
Well,
I
then
mean,
could
gluttony short term, like, just to use your example earlier, you mentioned people getting fat. Gluttony short term results in obesity, which
yes.
results in a negative health for that person, and an increased burden on the society as a whole.
Yeah. So, but it sounds to me like that argument that you're using right now, it could be used for any luxury product. I mean, spending all your money on gold jewelry
Sure,
doesn't help
sure.
so much, right? It could be detrimental
Sure.
in a way. So
It
should those
doesn't. Sure.
luxuries be banned?
Absolutely.
Or
No, those shouldn't be banned. Those shouldn't be banned because they don't actively harm someone. They can,
mm-hmm.
sure, anybody can become addicted to status symbols and things like that, but it's different when you're talking about drugs and alcohol, because they have a direct effect on someone.
Yeah, they affect
And
your health
certainly,
and
certain certainly
all that.
people, become, they'll rob banks, and they'll do this because they want to buy jewelry or whatever. That's such a small percentage, though. But I do think the gold is a good example, because it's an example of something that is, aside from the utility of gold in electronics and in manufacturing, it's almost strictly something that's material. The value is driven almost exclusively from the material factor. And
Yeah.
again, if you had a society raised on shunning the material, gold would not play, the desire for gold and the desire for luxury products would go down drastically.
You know, I'm not too confident about the ability to successfully implement a program where you teach children, or raise a generation to reject certain things. Like you could tell people, hey, drugs are bad. We had the DARE program in America. There's a lot of those kind of similar programs in every country in their education systems, more or less, right? And then, but what happens is the people are going to make their own decisions anyway, and the rejection rate can be extremely high. To give the first example that came to mind was the island of Cuba, and I know Cuba isn't quite as nationalist, but they are very communist, and they do implement, they do teach very strong anti-capitalist and pro-communist values from an international perspective. And what happens is a severely large ratio of the people, of the Cuban citizens, reject it, and they seek capitalism, and they seek to do black market stuff, and they wish that they could be more plugged into to the free market. They want more internet, and they want more luxuries, and they don't. Most of them don't accept that message that the communist government, gives to them when they grow up. And Cuba, believe it or not, has a higher per capita prison population than even America does. And I was surprised to hear that fact too. But I looked at the numbers, and it was true. They're like something like 20% higher per capita, because so many people are rejecting the official message, the official direction, that they get thrown in jail quite a lot. And most of them are for political prisoners. They're not getting thrown in jail for drinking too much rum, but they're getting thrown in jail for rejecting that attempt at teaching them these values that they make their own judgment on, and they decide that those values are not for them. So what I'm wondering is it possible for you to have a National Socialist type of system that doesn't result in a sky high per capita prison population? Or, you said you don't like prison. Well, what if it's like a sky high forced rehabilitation population? I would consider that more or less the same thing as a prison population. If
No, I mean you could put people in work camps. I mean they can build things. It can be a rehab/work program. They can be
yeah.
productive. They can generate revenue for themselves, which can be saved. They can generate revenue for their country. It's not like it has to be jail where it becomes a negative to society
Yeah.
immediately.
Well, the Soviet Union had the gulags, which were basically work camps, and it was considered, a rehabilitation program, but the outside world saw it just as, forced slave labor, and they equated it with being as bad as prison or whatever. You could make an argument about work camps and that it's, distinct from a straight up prison, but what I see there is I would predict that the ratio of people being put into the work camps in your system would be rather high, and it would result in an overall less happy population. And I think a lot of the people in that National Socialist country would yearn to immigrate and jump the border and go to the more capitalist, more economically liberal society, because they'd probably see more happiness over there, more luxuries, more gluttony, and not everyone, but I think a very high degree of people would yearn for that. On the other hand, I don't think you would have a very high number of people from the economically liberal society yearning to immigrate to the National Socialist country.
I don't agree with that.
Mm.
If you you mentioned the DARE program earlier and not being able to instill
Yeah.
values into a generation of people. I think we have examples of that now. Most of the surveys show that people under 20 prefer socialism, and that's not an accident. That's because American education has for whatever reason, it's a different subject to talk about, but has
Hmm.
have been more willing to speak to the benefits of socialism and the detriments of capitalism. So I think it's obvious that we can educate a generation of children to see things differently than their parents' generation.
Yeah.
So I also think that you mentioned the DARE program again, not being ineffective for in regards to the drugs. I don't think that the DARE program alone is enough. If you recall, I remember the DARE program when I was a kid,
Yeah, me
but
too.
if you recall, there were no restrictions placed on the promotion of drugs and alcohol in the media. you turn on any channel, you listen to any 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 music, whether it be country or rap, and they're glorifying the use of alcohol or drugs or both.
Yeah.
That's not something that should be allowed. If you're gonna have a program like that, it has to be a comprehensive program.
Well, well,
To promote the benefits of abstaining from these activities, and simultaneously allowing those activities to be advertised and promoted to the population is fundamentally idiotic.
well, it may or may let's say that it's idiotic for the sake of argument. Then, do you feel that in your National Socialist community that there would be some sort of censor program that would look at and either approve or deny for release certain cultural works, to make sure that they're clean, that you're not going to allow music to be published if it speaks of alcohol and drugs in a positive light, that kind of thing?
Of course.
See, those are the kind of steps that I really believe that people tend to resent those kind of censorious attempts on their cultural expression and on their the type of media they consume.
Well, I
Right?
gotta interrupt you there. That's true. I'm not denying that people resent that, but we have that today. I mean, you look at the language that's look at how people are being treated if they don't follow along with the current, transgender movement. People losing their jobs, people losing scholarships. So I don't think that saying, well, people are going to resent it means you shouldn't do it. We have that no matter what system we're in.
Sure, but we do have it no matter what system we're in. But I think I'd like to make a distinction between having the consumers make a judgment call and reject. Maybe right now consumers are going to reject music that has an anti-trans inclusivity message, right? So if there's some cultural piece that comes out that is anti-trans, most consumers today will reject it. But I think that's different than having an official policy where there's like a centralized bureaucracy or some sort of government control that's going to approve or deny the composition and release of those type of works. Having consumers make a choice is,
I think you're making a distinction without a difference. You know, it, there are certainly aspects of this bureaucracy in regards to the transgender movement. I mean, local governments and state governments are on board with this already.
yeah.
But more so, it's like I imagine someone from the libertarian perspective is against the government using metadata from people's cell phones, and somehow it's okay because they're not actually getting it from the consumer, they're getting it from the company, and that bypasses the consumer's right to their Fourth Amendment rights. So I would imagine it's the same thing. Just because the state is bypassing this bureaucracy, as you mentioned, and using another mechanism to enforce it, whether that be the schools, whether that be companies, whatever the mechanism is, it's still accomplishing the same thing.
I don't know if I agree with that, the distinction without a difference, rebuttal, because consumers do know the difference, and consumers do react differently, as opposed to whether they are given a choice that they can make themselves, or whether that choice is made for them by a censor board or something along those lines. And I'm not going to deny that local governments are stepping in certain ways when it comes to cultural works, or what consumers are allowed to choose between. But I think the governments that do that, those kind of things are generally discouraged, more or less. There's always exceptions, but when they, when Congress tried to put the warning labels and so on the music in the 90s, there was a big backlash over that. When they try and censor certain things, when Donald Trump tries to ban an app, a lot of people get mad about that because they don't like having the choice denied them. Those are the kind of things that I think make the consumers less happy, and make them more likely to it makes them more likely to yearn for the place that doesn't have those type of censorious controls on them. And like Cuba banned the Beatles, I think in the 60s and 70s, something like that. And then Beatles music became illegal, but Cubans were still able to listen to it. It was more difficult for them to obtain, but it's not like the Cubans were all following in lockstep with Fidel's decree and saying, yes, we must all, just refuse to listen to the Beatles. No, they wanted to listen to the Beatles. They wanted to make that choice themselves. And the Beatles was a quality cultural, product. So, and the ability for the Cubans to get the Beatles music, even illegally, increased their happiness and increased the meeting of their desires were more fulfilled in that regard. So that's what I want to see more of. I want to see the consumers have those kind of abilities allowable to them more, not less. And I think it does make a difference.
I understand your argument, but your argument always comes back to happiness being derived from material, and that to me that's
Mm-hmm.
not happiness. You can call it happiness in the short term, but it's not long term. Um, it's not fulfilling to fill your life with things. It's like cliche at this point. You can't take anything with you when you die.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about accumulating stuff, and that's what the libertarian and ANCAP position usually comes down to, is just the ability and the right to accumulate
Yeah,
stuff.
I'll admit we tend to
Um,
focus on that a lot. I'll totally
yeah,
admit
and
that.
I don't discount the importance of being productive and generating revenue. I'm not an idiot, but I think that when that's the
Hmm.
only measure of what makes your society happy or successful, then you're setting yourself up for failure.
Hmm.
Like, I don't disagree with you that people are going to be unhappy about an app being banned, or this or that being discouraged, or whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm.
But again, we have that in any society. If you have an incremental approach like the US government has, I'm sure in your position you would say there's been an incremental approach over, a century, to infringe on the rights of the individual and to remove protections and rights from the individual.
Yes.
So I know you would agree with that. So you can't say that, people are going to be unhappy with it, therefore it shouldn't be done. That can't be your position, because that's done no matter what. The reason you can't really use that as your argument for not doing it is because if you have an incremental approach, people are more willing to accept it. And that's been proven time and time again.
Yeah, it shocks them less when the increments are small and gradual. Sure.
Yes. And
Um,
if you were to gradually increase the education and the importance placed on values and on the nation and on the benefit of the nation long term, people are going to be less hostile towards it than just, I don't know what you're imagining, but just, a bunch of soldiers coming in and saying this is banned, and if you do it, you're going to the work camp. I think that's ridiculous. Um, but if you were to do it gradually, I don't think it's necessarily going to be unsuccessful, because people may not like it.
so what it, I want to ask you a question about the whole, there's more to happiness than material things. I'm interested in your position on that. Now, you did say, well, obviously, you did say that economics it does have its place and it is important, but it's not the only part of the equation for happiness, right? So, are you talking more about, now you said it's not something as simple as flag waving or having a Made in the USA sticker either, which was what I was trying to, like reduce it to earlier. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you think it is that I'm missing in the equation here to result in maximum happiness? Let's say it's not all material goods. What's the name for it?
Okay, well, let me pose it to you in a couple of different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Let me give you this scenario. Suppose people did place the ability to consume and the ability to accumulate stuff as their highest and most ultimate priority,
Mm-hmm.
to the extent that they no longer really cared about having kids, because it was cheaper to buy more. Kids are expensive, they're a long-term investment. You don't really see the payoff, because by the
Yeah.
time they've accumulated their wealth, you might be dead. um, if that's the position of, let's say, a large portion of your population, then you have necessarily placed your country, your society, your nation at a disadvantage economically compared to the international community, as well as militarily. If you're going to set up the mechanism by which your population is going to quote unquote voluntarily reduce itself,
Hmm.
you are setting yourself up to be at a disadvantage on many aspects in regard, compared to other countries who aren't going to do that.
Hmm.
That's not just the personal, religion or family things that could be more subjective. That's something that's tangible and verifiable.
Okay, and you know what? I think I know what you're talking about there, and I actually share your sentiment about the child raising thing because um, I don't believe that the Earth is overpopulated, at least not right now. It's not anywhere close, and I do believe that it is important to have. A sufficient birth rate so that you don't burden a working generation with taking care of an oversized, elderly and retired generation or something along those lines. Right. But I don't feel like, like child procreation should be compelled. And I will say that I wanted to be a dad from a very young age, and now I am a father, and I get a lot of fulfillment out of being a parent and having a family unit that we all participate in. So I can agree that there's a lot of fulfillment there, and I would also agree that the family aspect and being a parent is long term fulfillment, and while getting drunk is like a short term fulfillment thing, right? So I see your points there, but I don't see how those desires and those values that I agree with you on should result in some kind of like compelled, national policy, or what to the degree where prohibition should be enforced, or people should be compelled to give birth. Like for example, Romania during the Iron Curtain days. They made abortion illegal, and doctors could go to jail for giving abortions. And you know what the result was? They did that because they wanted a strong workforce. The result was they had a bunch of unhappy kids in orphanages that no one would adopt. And a lot of women were getting dangerous back alley style abortions illegally, and that was a big debacle, and it ended up being a huge quality of life, reduction for the country of Romania. Now, I honestly don't know if you want to like ban abortion or what. I didn't hear your position on that, but I was just using that as an example in terms of a national policy that tried to obtain a, family goal and ended up making things worse overall.
Well, again, that we have that in any system. So, in any government, any system, any societal system where the
Mm-hmm.
government can take action is
Mm-hmm.
going to have unintended consequences, no matter what the desired goal is up front.
Yeah.
Um, but when you say that you don't think things should be compelled, I think there's a timeline issue here. For example, just the prohibition thing. I'm not saying, tomorrow everything, all drugs and alcohol should be strictly banned and, the ban should be enforced harshly. What I'm saying is
You're talking about
it has
incrementalism, right?
yes, it has to be an incremental approach. And also, if you have a generation or two of people raised to see the detriments of that and to also see the benefits of abstaining from those things. And not only that, if you stop, I think I would hope you would agree with me that if you were to ban, and this would be much easier than a comprehensive, education reform, ban the promotion of drugs and alcohol, you would have a severe reduction in the usage of that among young people who are impressionable. I mean, that's the entire formulation behind advertising. Advertising works. So I think that this constant bombardment and the promotion of these substances definitely have an effect on young people. And if you were to remove that, you would have a reduction in their use.
Yes, you can do a lot to discourage and reduce the consumption of those things. In the Muslim world, it is illegal to obviously promote alcohol in media or in advertising, like on billboards or TV commercials. Right, drugs and alcohol are very much frowned upon over there, and you can go to jail if you're just caught in possession of it. So the Muslim world, it's pretty obvious to me that the youth in the Muslim world consume much less alcohol and drugs per person than the youth do in the West, like in North America or Western Europe, for example. But I would also say that there is a strong, regardless, there is a strong black market for drugs and alcohol in the Muslim world, and it is primarily composed of young adult consumers, the teenagers and the people in their 20s and 30s, and they put themselves at great personal risk to obtain those luxury goods, those gluttonous goods, right? So
Sure.
so there's a trade-off there where you can reduce. You can't. Maybe you understand that you can't eliminate completely that kind of consumption, but with an incremental approach, you can reduce the consumption to a lower degree, and that may be true. But the trade-off is that you're gonna increase your prison population or your work camp, rehab population by a significant degree. And I would argue, you probably don't agree with me on this, but I would argue that type of system is a net loss. It's not a net benefit for the society as a whole, having the more liberalized and permissive approach where instead of an incremental ratcheting up of bans, if you just have education about it and having people discourage it in certain contexts and talk about moderation and responsibility, then people can be allowed to indulge in those things without taking it to an extreme and causing more self-harm. They'll be more likely to enjoy those kind of things on a more responsible level, I think. And that's a lot of what the modern education movement is when it comes to drugs and alcohol, at least in the West, is that it talks about harm reduction and responsible use and moderation, right? Do you feel like there would be room for that kind of thing?
I mean, there could be room for it. I don't think that's actually. I don't think that's accurate. I don't think in the West we promote responsible use of alcohol or
Well,
any drug.
not in the
I
rap
mean,
songs and rock songs, but
I know it's. I mean, every TV show, every movie is that people are getting high, people are getting drunk, and these are children and young impressionable people watching these things. I don't think it's accurate to say that we're promoting some kind of responsibility here. To me, that's the exact opposite.
Hmm.
Responsibility would be not allowing that to be advertised and promoted to children.
Yeah. Well, let me back up a bit. When I was talking about the responsible usage kind of thing, I was actually, what had come to my mind at that moment was responsible use for more hard illegal drugs in North America among the party and music club and that kind of scene. There's a lot of talk about responsible use and testing when it comes to things like ecstasy and cocaine and things like that, which you might think that those drugs could never be consumed responsibly in any context, but among those people that do consume those kind of drugs, they do talk about moderation and responsibility when it comes to like things like message boards and forums. I'm not talking about music that says, oh, let's, get high off coke. I'm talking about when these consumers talk with each other, especially on the internet and message boards and stuff. They talk about ways to reduce the chance of harm because these drugs are pretty hard and pretty dangerous, and they talk about ways to indulge in them responsibly. And I feel like they're pretty successful in that regard because they manage to keep their lives functional and have a successful and fulfilling life in the daytime, and then they're able to party at night and maintain somewhat of a balance there. I suspect you probably don't agree with my sentiment.
Well, I don't. I mean, I can't say that I've looked at the data, but when
Mm-hmm.
someone is regularly using drugs or alcohol, their family is much more likely to suffer,
Mm-hmm.
um, whether that be from domestic abuse or child abuse or divorce. Those rates are much higher among alcoholics and drug addicts.
That's
And to me,
that's true.
I don't know. I think you could boil this down to a more fundamental question, and that's if there's something that's objectively bad, for we can look at just two metrics and discount happiness for a second because that's strictly individual. We can look at the economic impact of a person and their of a person individually, and then their economic impact on the people as a greater whole. When if there's something that's objectively bad for someone's health, why should that be accepted to whatever extent that you find it acceptable, so long as it's being used responsibly? If it's going to result in a negative and an externality onto the healthcare system or to that person's productivity economically.
Well, see, that's really quickly. It really quickly devolves into a slippery slope because let's say, all right, we can say alcohol is objectively bad because it harms your body, and hard drugs are objectively bad because they harm their body. Let's prohibit the manufacture and sale of all of those, and then next, what happens the next day? Someone who just recently banned those things goes, "Aha! You know what else is bad? Meat, red meat. We're gonna, you know what? Everyone has to be a vegetarian." And then the next day, someone says, "Okay, now everyone has to be a vegan." And then before you know it, you've got a very unhappy society that all the luxury goods are removed.
I'm not saying
and then they say, "Okay,
the slippery slope is definitely real, but you have to have lines somewhere. I mean, otherwise you're just an anarchist. Lines have to be drawn in some places.
Yeah.
And
Well,
you
I am an
can't
anarchist. Yeah.
Well, I don't
But
think
yeah, I
the
get you.
majority of people want. I don't think not even 1% of the global population wants anarchy. Personally,
Yeah,
I think
you're
history's
probably right.
demonstrated time and time again. Most people are more comfortable following the rules than making their own rules. I think that's just human nature. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I think rejecting that is rejecting human behavior, and we just only get negative consequences from that.
Yeah.
Um, but I also don't think that um, I don't think that everything is going to be eliminated in its totality, with 100% precision. I understand that black markets exist. I understand that the desire for illicit substances, especially among regular users, won't go away overnight.
Hmm.
But I don't think that you can base a policy on, well, you can't actually
On
eliminate all of it, therefore it shouldn't
total
be a policy, because
permissiveness.
again, that's just anarchy.
Yeah, I got you. So I want to back up a minute, and I think I understand your point, but I want to back up just a second to something that you said a moment ago. When what was it you said? It's on the tip of my tongue. You said that most people like to follow the rules. Most people aren't anarchists. I obviously anarchy and extreme liberalism is not a very popular position across the earth, and people do like following the rules. But I would say that when it comes to, because we have the benefit of all these different countries with varying degrees of severity of rules. Some countries, all the countries have rules, all the countries have leaders and governments, but there's those governments exercise different degrees of grip and control on the populace depending on where you go. And I think that overall, we see more happiness and more satisfaction among the people with those governments that tend to have a softer approach, that tend to have a softer touch, and are more permissive in most respects, especially when it comes to luxury goods and things. And even if some of those luxury goods and the permissiveness of gluttony results in increased medical problems or maybe slightly reduced productivity during the workday, there is a balancing act there that can happen successfully to the point where the people feel like their happiness level has gone up when they have a certain amount of the rule following and a certain amount of productivity, and then on the other hand they get to let their hair down for a portion of the day and indulge in gluttonous activities and indulge in things that might be harmful to their bodies, but give them happiness nonetheless. Give them a wild time, and they buy a sports car or they smoke a cigar, or they enjoy a fine whiskey. So letting the consumers make those decisions and letting those rules get set on a consumer free market based kind of thing, I think is the overall better approach, and is going to lead to increased prosperity and happiness for most people, and make that society more desirable. More people will yearn towards it and want to become a part of that society rather than the other way around.
Well, I don't disagree with that last part. I don't
Mm,
necessarily agree that that's a benefit. Just appealing to base human nature and saying, oh well, here's a country, we just allow everybody to do what's in their baser nature. Come here, and we'll all just do it together. I don't see how that's a recipe for success long term. Especially when let's use China as an example. They're more strict on many things than we are here.
yeah,
And also culturally, it's not nearly as acceptable to indulge in drugs and alcohol to the extent that it is here.
yeah.
And when you take into the difference in the population sizes, allowing your country or importing a bunch of people, and ultimately they're just going to become consumers and druggies and alcoholics and whatever. Really are putting yourself at a disadvantage to a more disciplined society. Um, I don't think that the appeal
Well,
to this.
can you elaborate on that? When you said you put yourself at a disadvantage to a more disciplined society, I'm interested in how that expresses itself. Like, what kind of disadvantages are you referring to? Can you share?
Okay, let's use a really like tangible example now.
Mm-hmm.
The issue of basically, and the issue and acceptance of anyone into the U.S. military, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
whether you're fit enough to do the job or not, whether you could pick up your 200-pound brother and his body weight and his gear and nearly dead weight, and pick him up and move him to safety. That's something that's been completely tossed aside because we are allowing the individual rights to trump the overall, not only the cohesiveness but the success of a military unit. And when that can easily be extrapolated and applied to many different aspects of society. You can apply that to companies, to schools, to the government at large, to society as a greater whole. Um, I I don't think you would disagree that when you allow standards to slip because it's more, I guess you would say that, well, the person will be happier or there's less short-term harm. I don't think you would think that that's a net benefit, right?
Um,
Just in the example,
yeah.
let's just keep it to the example of a military unit.
Or
Would
some
you
kind of
say
job.
that
It doesn't have to be military. It sounds like this would be equally applicable to any kind of job, especially a
it
job that
is?
involved
I'm just
physical
trying to
labor, right?
just Yes, it would be. I
Yeah.
mean, you can't always appeal to the happiness of some individual and place any unit at a less productive or less potentially productive rate.
You know,
I mean, I don't think we'd consider that a net positive, right?
it is true that when you overindulge in things or let people, when people do a whole lot of short-term happiness kind of activities, it can cause a decreased performance in their labor, in their work. And if they have an important job like being a firefighter or a security guard or a gold miner or something, where they or a crab fisherman, those kind of jobs are very physically demanding, and it could theoretically reduce their productivity. But then again, there's, all work and no play make Jack a dull boy. And when you don't let them unwind and partake in a certain degree of luxuries and excitement in a leisure aspect, right?
I
That's
don't
going to,
disagree with you. I'm sorry to interrupt. I don't
sure.
disagree with you at all. People should have entertainment. People should be able to go out on the weekend and do stuff.
Yeah.
I'm not disagreeing with that, but we had all of that before we had a society filled with pornography and drugs and alcohol and hookup culture. We had all of that before we had all of this. That's actually been human history. This experiment where anything goes pretty much is very new.
Yes, yeah, it feels like it's uncharted territory in a sense, right? And it does feel like a lot of these things a lot of these activities are being distilled. And what I mean is, instead of just going out with your friends on and enjoying a sunset at the beach, now people want to go to an all-night beach party rave and melt their faces off with massive amounts of drugs and then have anonymous sex with a lot of people, and that may seem kind of scary, but but
It's
paradoxically
not only scary. There are verifiable and demonstrable negative consequences.
yeah, but then at the same time, and it seems kind of counterintuitive here, but bear with me. The fact of the matter is that the amount of productivity that society has right now in the economy and in the workforce is higher than it's ever been, and the amount of prosperity, the amount of poverty is down while people do this. So I feel like there is room to have both of these things happening, and it hasn't
Well,
it hasn't destroyed society into a Fallout style wasteland. What we have are more skyscrapers, and we have more
I think
sports
that's
cars.
I think that's up for debate.
Mm.
The Fallout style wasteland. I think that's a whole that could be a debate in itself. But I wouldn't attribute the increased productivity of like I guess you're using GDP to measure it and
Well,
the relative rates of poverty in the U.S. I guess those are your two units of measure here.
yeah, yeah.
But I wouldn't attribute the increased productivity and the decrease in poverty to the increased availability of permissive sex and drugs and alcohol and pornography and things. I think that's kind
Uh,
of absurd on its face.
you know,
That's an increase.
I
We've
didn't
had a
mean to do
massive
that.
increase in population, which increases the total productivity of a nation. And we also have had a boom in technology, which has made people more individually productive.
Yes.
So I don't necessarily think that the availability of those things has contributed to the increased productivity. I think it's actually the opposite. When you look at people who are on the lower end of the income scale, who are the people who are least productive, they have gotten even less productive. I mean, most of the country are net tax negatives. Um, so it's something
Hmm.
like the bottom 50 or 55% pay no income tax, and we're not debating the
Yeah,
constitutionality or
but
the morality of income tax here, but
that's
um,
that's just a consequence of of an increasingly progressive taxation policy that has gotten more progressive over time. And it is true that technology takes a big share or a big portion of the responsibility for the increased productivity. And I didn't mean to say that like having more wild, gluttonous and drug fueled activity is the reason why the productivity went up. I hope sorry for the confusion there. But what I'm trying to say is that those kind of things go hand in hand with each other. When you have more productivity and more prosperity, people have more opportunities to go further with their gluttony and go further with their recreational substance abuse and things like that, and when you increase productivity and people seek those things out, when you try to artificially deny those things to those people, that's what's going to influence and quite possibly negatively influence their motivation to be productive, and it's going to make them feel like they have less self-determination and less actualization of their desires and so on. You know.
well, I take issue with your characterization that we're just preventing people from doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
This is not just a matter of preventing people from doing things. This is I'm talking about a fundamental change in the way people look at their own life and look at the value of themselves relative to the society and the value of the society as a whole, which is something we completely disregard now. Everything is second to the individual's rights to kind of do whatever they want, and that this extreme liberalism. I understand we still have a government, and we know it's not
Yeah.
anarchy, but it's like state enforced extreme liberalism.
Yeah.
And
More or less.
even
Yeah.
the desire for any kind of standard is chastised. um and to me, this is nothing like the entire position of I understand you can be an anarchist, you can be an ANCAP, you can be a libertarian,
and disagree with many of the things that go on today, and you think people
Yeah.
shouldn't be doing drugs and shouldn't be doing alcohol. You just don't think the state should have any involvement. But
Yeah.
otherwise, this is just it's a hedonism. I mean, that's basically what Western philosophy has been boiled down to. We've got
Hedonism
thousands of
is
years
great, man.
of thought.
I enjoy hedonism. I've enjoyed a lot of hedonism in my life, and I
Yeah,
feel like it has
I
enhanced my life
understand.
experience. I have fond memories, you know?
Yeah, I get that, but that doesn't mean it's good. That doesn't mean it's a net good.
Uh, I mean, see, I count, it's like a question of who has the value. One man's trash is another man's treasure, and beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And one person might say, hey, it's bad to have luxury Bugattis and Ferraris on the street. And then to another person, it's like one of their greatest life goals realized is to buy their very first Ferrari, and they'll mortgage their house to do it, and they will obsess over that car for the rest of their life. And to that person, that was a huge prosperity boost to their quality of life. You know what I mean? So some of these luxury kind of the question of these luxuries and gluttony and what should be allowed and not allowed. See, people have different values. Some people want to climb Mount Everest, and some people want to just piss their money away on some stupid fancy car. So there's to try and artificially limit those things, I think, is going to result in people feeling like their life goals were not as adequately met.
What is artificial? Can you define your definition of
When I say
artificial?
artificial, I'm referring to having a mandate or a prohibition handed down from on high. And I know you said you don't want to say preventing things from happening, and that you want to be incremental, but you did also speak in favor, I believe, of drug and alcohol prohibition. So if there's going to be a restriction of the ability of people to get those kind of things, that's what I call the artificial, restriction or artificial prohibition of those kind of things.
Sure. So I guess that's technically an accurate definition, but I think it doesn't take into account the organic. It's as organic as you can possibly have
You
when
want
you're.
it to be more organic than artificial in the way
Yes, of
your
course.
policy would be implemented,
It's not
right?
it's not only a top-down, heavy-handed approach from, like a punitive approach. An
Mm-hmm.
approach also from the bottom up. And again, that's been demonstrated. We can do that. We can fundamentally alter the views and the values of a generation of children. We do that all the time. And
Okay. I
there
think
would
I.
be I would like to get your opinion, and I would like you to give me some negatives for that. If this was an approach that we took, can you and people and as a result of people's education and a result of a culture change, can you give me some negatives from a large reduction in the use of alcohol and drugs and promiscuous sex and pornography and all the things that we know are bad, but we have allowed under the guise of whatever amendment or the rights of the individual? I'd like to know what negatives stem from people choosing not to do those things.
Okay, that's a good question. To answer that question, first let me start by saying that when I think about the term organic, and I like the fact that you used that word, when I think about the term organic, to me, I think about a consumer-driven push, or a
Okay, well,
consumer-driven
wait, hang
trend,
on.
rather.
I got to interject here. I'm not disagreeing with that, but you can't say that even the consumer market's organic approach is not affected by the way that we are all brought up here and in government schools. So I don't think you
Yeah,
can
yeah.
discount that. We are like, you can call that organic, but the government actually promotes consumerism and promotes all these things.
Sure, but that and the government does do that, but the consumer trends and the fickle, changing nature of what consumers want would still happen with or without a government existing. It is true that the government definitely has a big part to play in that presently. But if we can settle and agree on the definition of organic there, for the sake of the argument, to answer the question, I would say no, it's not bad to have an organic change in perspectives, in values, and in customer wants, to the point where it results in a reduction of gluttony, a reduction of drug abuse or alcohol consumption, and leisure, and all those things that you consider detrimental. I wouldn't have a problem with that happening in an organic sense. The artificial sense, the from the top down thing, is the part that I have a problem with. Now, of course, what you pointed out a moment ago was that even in a consumer trend, there is an element of a government or a regulator, so to speak, that is going to play a certain degree of influence in that consumer shift. That happens, but I think that's a lot different than just, passing an amendment that says alcohol's illegal from sea to shining sea. If the consumers go, look, maybe alcohol's not all that awesome anymore, and we're going to buy less of it and consume less of it, and then a bunch of alcohol producers go out of business and other ones get smaller, that I'm not going to sit there and scream bloody murder at that. Just as an aside, related to that, not too long ago, about maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I read a headline that said, young people in America are having less sex, less premarital sex, right? And that birth rates were going down as a result. And it seemed that, they were saying, they were asking, why is that happening? Because condoms are more available than ever. And people are more educated about sex. How come they're having less sex? And I think it was, if I recall, they were saying, the increased education about sex among the youth has caused them to be more moderate and make more responsible choices and have less premarital sex overall. Now, to me, that seems more or less an organic change. And even though it results in less, gluttony and less hedonism, I don't have any problem with that kind of change happening and young people deciding to do less of some hedonistic activity if that's what they feel like they want to do.
Well, to go back just a bit to your point about the quantity of sex among the youth, there's two things. One, that is 100% reliant on self-reporting, and I don't believe people are honest about that, especially women. It's the old adage, whatever a guy says, divide by 3, and whatever a woman says, multiply by 3.
Yeah.
But also the amount of sex that attractive people are having has actually gone up. So I think this is like where we get the rise of the quote incel, which I think is hilarious. But it's when you've removed basically any barrier to sex, it's as simple as swiping your finger left or right and finding somebody to sleep with. You eliminate a large portion, of people who would be generally considered unattractive, especially men who are considered unattractive. The access for them is greatly reduced, and that's also something that factors into that equation when they say people are having less sex. People who are considered attractive are having more sex, but attractive people are always outnumbered by unattractive people.
I see. Well, you know what? I hate to say it, but we've already gone an hour and 17 minutes. The time flew for me because I'm enjoying the back and forth. You're giving me a lot of interesting arguments that I feel like I need to increase my familiarity with. Although I'm definitely still a hardcore liberal capitalist, I got to say that your perspective does have more nuance than I initially thought it would. It sounds like, whether or not I agree with you, it sounds like you thought through a lot of these topics. So I want to thank you again for coming on the show. Maybe we can do it again sometime in the future. Do you have a parting comments or anything you'd like to say before we end the video?
No, just a bit. I would say it's been a pleasure for me. The time flew as well. I've enjoyed it. I would love to do it again if you'll have me back. I have these are positions that are well thought out, and not only because I think these are important subjects, but also again, my journey from being like what I would consider a radical individualist, much like you, I assume,
Mm-hmm.
has given me more of a comprehensive look. I believe than if I just came to this first. If this was how I
Oh,
was raised,
yeah.
if this what I was brought up in, I wouldn't have nearly as comprehensive of a view as I do now.
Yeah,
So
because you've
this
seen it
really
from
has
the other
been
side, right? So
yeah.
you have both perspectives, and I gotta say, I don't think you really strawmanned me at all, and it seems like I do agree with you. It does sound like you have a significant, a sufficient understanding of the liberal radical capitalist position. So you definitely debated in good faith. I hope I did the same. If I strawmanned you at all, it certainly wasn't intentional. I do like debating in good faith, and what we'll probably do is we'll probably try and plan another debate in the future, because it sounds like there's a lot of stuff you and I can still talk to each other about, and it'll
Sure.
as long as it
I'd
makes
love
for interesting listening, and I'm all for it. Yeah.
Sure, that sounds great to me. I appreciate it.
Okay. Well, everyone watching, thanks for tuning in. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as we did. It was invigorating. We'll have another episode with Aleph in the future, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their day.